Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We are up to Perek Ted Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Minuchatam Began Eden. Amen. Just to recap, Rabotai, what we learned yesterday, because today is connected to it. We spoke about yesterday, a Kohen may eat or drink Terumot or apply it to his body, but he is forbidden to plant it, as the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Shvi'it, chapter 8, Mishnah 2. Now, if someone did plant seeds of Terumot, whatever grows from them biblically is considered chulin, ordinary produce. Therefore, biblically, it is regular tevel, and it may not be eaten before it is tithed. However, the Chachamim, the sages, decreed that whatever grows from Terumot must be treated as Terumot, and we explained yesterday why the sages decreed this. And therefore, the Gemara Masechet Shabbat, page 17b, tells us it is always forbidden to non-Kohanim. So today's Mishnah is going to discuss, although the rabbis decreed that the produce grown from Terumot has the sanctity of Terumot, this is true only that it is forbidden, in that it is forbidden to non-Kohanim. But in all other respects, it is treated like regular, ordinary produce, chulin, as the next two Mishnah they're going to make clear. So the Mishnah says, Mishnah Bet, V'chayevet beleket ufshicha of peah, and a field in which Terumot was planted is subject to the laws of leket, shicha, and peah, which we said these are portions of a private crop that the Torah allows poor people to take. Now, this field in which Terumot was planted is obligated in leket, shicha, and peah, even though Terumot is usually exempt from these laws. And the reason is, the Mefarshim explain, because since the produce of this field is only Terumot midrabanan, under rabbinic law, it's not exempt from the deoraita, the biblical laws that apply to ordinary tevel, which include the obligation of leket, shicha, and peah. This is Tosfot's explanation in Masechet Pesachim, page 34a. The Mishnah continues, V'anyei Yisrael v'anyei Kohanim melaktim, and both poor Yisraelim and poor Kohanim may gather its leket, shicha, and peah. V'anyei Yisrael mochin et shalayim lakohanim b'dmei terumah, and the poor Yisraelim who are obviously not allowed to eat the produce because it is terumah b'drabanan, they sell theirs to Kohanim, but only for the lower price of Terumot, which the Mefarshim explain, Terumot sells for much less than Chulin, because there is less demand for Terumot in view that only Kohanim can have it, and only under certain conditions. Therefore, the Israelim sell it at the lower price of Terumot to Kohanim, V'adamim shelahem, and the money they receive from their sale is theirs to keep. And the Mefarshim explain why, because under the rabbinic law, a non-Kohen is forbidden only to eat the Terumot growths, but he can have other benefit from them. Therefore, poor Israelim who gather leket, shicha, and peah, they may sell them to a Kohen and keep the money. But again, since these items may only be eaten by Kohanim, they are sold for the lower price of Terumot. The Mishnah continues, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Rabbi Tarfon says, Lo yilaktu al einei Kohanim, shema yishkechu ve'itnu letoch piem. Rabbi Tarfon says that the rabbis decreed that no one may gather leket, shicha, and peah from this field except poor Kohanim. Why? Shema yishkechu v'yidnu letoch piem. Poor Israelim are forbidden to do so because they might forget that the Terumot produce is forbidden to them and mistakenly put it in their mouths and eat it. And the Mefarshim explained, according to Rabbi Tarfon, the sages considered it necessary to prohibit non-Kohanim from even gathering leket, shicha, and peah in the field of Terumot, for fear that they might eat the Terumot. Now, the previous opinion we quoted, the previous Tana, he holds that no such prohibition was made by the sages, either because the produce is only Terumot midrabanan on a rabbinic level, and therefore we're not going to make a fence, a gzera on another drabanan, or because non-Kohanim can be trusted not to eat it, because they're anyways accustomed to avoiding eating Terumot, The Mishnah continues, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Tarfon, he tried to disprove Rabbi Tarfon's ruling. Im ken, if it's true that Israelim are not allowed to gather produce in the field of Terumot, lo yilaktu ele teorim, then even Kohanim, not all Kohanim should be allowed to gather there unless they are tahor, not when they are tameh. Why? Because a Kohen who is tameh should be treated just like Israel. Since a tameh Kohen is forbidden to eat this drabanan Terumot, therefore he's the same, technically, if you look at it, like the Israel. However, we don't see any prohibition against a Tameh Kohen gathering in this field. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Tarfon, just like there's no prohibition by the Tameh Kohen, there should be no prohibition against a Israel doing so either. Now, in essence, what Rabbi Akiva is telling Rabbi Tarfon, if the sages considered it necessary to forbid Israelim to gather produce in the field of Terumot, they would have also forbade Tameh Kohanim from gathering there. So, in view of the fact that Tameh Kohanim are allowed to gather in such a field, even a point in which even Rabbi Tarfon agrees, it follows that the Chachamim would never prohibit Yisraelim to do so. Now, the Mishnah doesn't tell us what Rabbi Tarfon would answer Rabbi Akiva, but the elucidated article quotes the Tosfot and Sheshem, who does bring down what Rabbi Talfon would answer Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Talfon would respond by arguing that there is a difference between a Yisrael and a Tameh Kohen. A Yisrael might unthinkably eat the terumah he's gathering, but there's no such concern for a Tameh Kohen because Kohanim are especially careful of laws that affect, in the observance of laws that affect Kohanim. In essence, what the Mefarshim are saying is that the Yisrael, being that he's not, according to Rabbi Talfon, he's not as careful as the Kohen, he might eat the terumah without even thinking about it. Whereas Kohanim, even if they're tameh, they're especially careful to the laws that affect only them. But the Rav does tell us, V'alacha ki Rabbi Akiva, the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, which follows the view of the Tana Kama, that both poor Yisraelim and poor Kohanim can collect the leket shicha and pe'ah, and then the Yisraelim sell it at a terumah lower price for the Kohanim, and they keep the money for themselves. That is then Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now continues its discussion about produce that grew in a field planted with terumah. V'chayevet b'ma'asrot u'ma'aser sheni. This field where you planted terumah seeds, it's subject to the obligations of ma'aser, ma'aser rishon, ma'aser sheni, and to the obligation of ma'aser ani. Now the Mefarshim say, since these terumah growths are only considered terumah midrabanan, but they are tevel under biblical law midoraita, they're still subject to all the usual ma'aser obligations. Therefore, the owner has to separate from them ma'aser rishon, ma'aser sheni, and ma'aser ani, which we said the ma'aser given to the poor is on the 3rd and 6th year, and then on the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th year, instead of giving ma'aser ani, you give ma'aser sheni to eat it in Yerushalayim, like we spoke about many times. Now, terumah and terumat ma'aser also have to be separated from the terumah growths. So the Rav says the reason the Mishnah didn't quote it is because they have to be given to Kohanim, for free. They have to be given to Kohanim for free, whereas the ma'asot can be sold to Kohanim, like the Mishnah is going to tell us right now. V'aniyei Yisrael, v'aniyei Kohanim notnim, and both poor Israelim and poor Kohanim can take the Maaser Ani. V'aniyei Yisrael mochin et shalem leKohanim b'dmei terumah, and the poor Israelim who are not allowed to eat it because it's rabbinic terumah, they can sell theirs to Kohanim, but only for the lower price of terumah. V'adamim shalem, and again the money they receive from the sale is theirs to keep, because again we know the Mefarshim tell us non-Kohanim are forbidden to eat terumah growths, but they're allowed to benefit from them. Therefore, although the poor Israelim cannot eat the Maaser Ani of the crop, they can sell it to a Kohen and keep the money. Same thing by a Levi, you can accept the Maaser Rishon and then sell it to a Kohen after separating terumah Maaser, which obviously goes to the Kohen for free. And the Mefarshim do point out that the Maaser Sheni, however, cannot be sold, because the Mishnah is going to tell us in Masechet Maaser Sheni, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, you are not allowed to sell Maaser Sheni. It has to be given free of charge to a Kohen who will eat it in Yerushalayim. Now the Tiferet Yisrael points out a very good point actually, that we just read in the previous Mishnah, Rabbi Talfon ruled that non-Kohanim are forbidden to gather leket shicha and pay out the field of terumah because they might carelessly eat it. So, but if you notice here in the Mishnah, he doesn't disagree with the Tana. He doesn't say poor Yisraelim cannot take the Maaser Ani. Now, why here he allows it and there he doesn't? Now, the reason for the difference is that in order to collect leket shicha and pe'ah, a poor person has to enter the field and gather them himself. So according to Rabbi Talfon, as he's busy collecting the produce, there's a strong risk that he will accidentally eat some. But this risk is very much lower in the case of Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani, which are not gathered, but they're handed by the owner to the recipient. Therefore here he didn't disagree. He said poor Israelim can collect the Maaser Ani. The Mishnah continues now. It teaches us how grain that grew in a terumah field should be threshed. Hachovet mishubach. The Mishnah says someone who beats the seeds out of the grain with sticks is more praiseworthy than one who threshes it with an animal. Why? Because one is forbidden to let his animals eat growths of terumah. And Mepharshim explain that, just the background of what threshing is. Threshing is the process of separating the kernels of grain from their stalks and husks. So the Mishnah is dealing now with two methods of threshing. One method is to spread the stalks of grain on the floor and have animals like oxen walk over them. The other method is to beat the stalks with sticks. Now, using animals to thresh growths of terumah presents a halachic problem. Why? On the one hand, a non-Kohen may not let his animals eat terumah, because the halacha against eating terumah forbids it not only to non-kohanim, but also to his animals. Therefore, he would have to prevent his animal from eating the terumah. However, mideoraita, it is forbidden to prevent an animal from eating the produce it's working on. Lo tachsom shor b'disho. The Torah in Sefer Dvarim in chapter 25, pasuk 4 tells us you're not allowed to cover the mouth of an animal with a muzzle while it's working. So in order to avoid this problem, because on the one hand I can't close the mouth of my animal, on the second hand it's the Rabbanan terumah, which even my animal cannot eat. The Mishnah teaches that it's better to thresh the terumah with sticks than with the animal. Now the Mefarshim point out, based off the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia, page 98, that usually the prohibition to prevent an animal from eating the produce from eating the produce it's working on doesn't apply to forbidden food like terumah. But again, here we're dealing with a drabanan terumah. Biblically, this is not terumah. Therefore, the Gemara tells us this exemption that you're allowed to muzzle your animal's mouth so that he won't eat forbidden produce like terumah, that's only when the terumah is biblical. But when the terumah is drabanan, then the prohibition does apply and you cannot close the animal's mouth. So like we said, the Gemara tells us the only time you violate the prohibition of closing the animal's mouth is if the food is permitted. If the food is forbidden, like terumah, you can muzzle the animal's mouth. Now, when we say if the food is forbidden, we mean on a biblical level. If it's only a rabbinic level, then the Torah says you can't muzzle his mouth. So here, that's why we have this problem that on the one hand, my animal cannot eat this food because it's rabbinic terumah, but on the other hand, technically it's permitted food, so I can't muzzle his mouth. Therefore, the Mishnah told us, in order to avoid this problem, better thresh with the terumah with sticks than with animals. The Mishnah says, "Vadash ketzad yatzeh." But let's say a person wants to thresh the grain using an animal. So what should he do? How does he prevent it from eating the terumah without violating the biblical prohibition of lo tachsom shor b'disho? Don't muzzle the animal when they're threshing. So the Mishnah says, "Toleh chefifot betzavere behema." He should hang baskets from the neck of the animal, and he put into them animal feet of chulin from the same species as the one being threshed. Because now, for example, the Mefarshim say, if the produce being threshed is wheat, the feet in the basket should be wheat. If the produce is being threshed is barley, the feet should be barley. This way, the Rambam in his commentary writes, whenever the animal has a craving for the species of grain it's threshing, it will eat the permitted grain in the basket instead of the forbidden terumah. It comes out that he is neither muzzling the animal since it can eat food of the same species from the basket, nor is he feeding it terumah since he's providing it chulin instead. That is today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.